wake in absolute darkness. No streetlights, no glow from a phone, not even moonlight through glass, because there is no glass. The air inside this room is barely warmer than the air outside. Your breath makes no cloud you can see, but you feel it. Cold enough to ache. You're lying on straw, and the straw is damp. Somewhere near your feet, a goat shifts its weight. Your stomach is empty. It was empty when you fell asleep. And the sun won't rise for another hour. This is England. The year is 1300. And today, like every day, you'll work to eat, if you're lucky. You are one child among 5 or 6 million others. That number matters. England in 1300 is as full as it will ever be until factories appear 5 centuries later. The land is farmed to its edges. Every field that can grow grain already does. And it's not enough. A good harvest feeds most people. A bad harvest starves thousands. Bad harvests come often. The system was already at capacity when you were born. 40% of children like you won't survive to adulthood. Disease, hunger, cold, and accidents thin the numbers before you even learn a trade. This isn't tragedy. It's arithmetic. The world you inhabit runs on a margin so thin that one failed crop, one harsh winter, one fever can tip everything. We are going to follow you through one full day in the year 1300. Before dawn to final sleep. Not the big events, the small ones. The ones that actually ran a life. By the end, you will know exactly what that day cost. In labor, in cold, in fear, in the quiet decisions no one recorded. A clock no one owned, but everyone obeyed. At what age did you stop being a child? And what was the very first task you were asked to do each morning? By age 6, the answer was already clear. You were not a child anymore. You were labor. The first task came before light, before anyone spoke, before the animals woke fully. You rose in total darkness. The fire had died overnight. The room was frozen. Your first job was to revive it. You knelt at the hearth. You blew on embers buried in ash. Your hands were numb. Your breath made no vapor you could see, but you felt it return cold against your face. If the fire died completely, the household lost hours. So this task was yours. You were 6, maybe 7, and you did not fail. Once the fire held, you fetched water, a wooden pail. A path you walked in darkness, the well or the stream. You carried it back. The weight was real. Then you cleared the floor. During the night, the cow and pig slept in the same room. What they left behind, you removed. With your hands, with straw. There was no transition. Sleep ended. Work began. The line between them did not exist. You were hungry before you began. Not the hunger that arrives after a skipped lunch. Chronic hunger. Background hunger. The kind that does not announce itself because it never left. The morning meal, when it came, was pottage. A thick, gray-brown stew of oats or barley, boiled with whatever root vegetables survived the winter store. Turnip, parsnip, sometimes a handful of dried peas. It was filling in the way that water is filling. It took the edge off. It did not build a body. Meat was rare, perhaps once a week, perhaps less. Salt fish appeared in certain seasons. Dairy, if the household kept an animal and the animal was producing. Most days, none of that, just the grain, just the broth. What this meant for your body was not felt as deprivation. It was felt as normal. You did not know a child in another country eating differently. You had no comparison. You knew only that by mid-morning your focus narrowed, and your legs felt heavy, and the work still waited. Skeletal remains from rural medieval England tell the story your records could not. Roughly a third of children showed stunted growth and low bone density. Development delayed, the body making quiet decisions about what to prioritize when resources ran short. Here is what that means in practice. Chronic caloric deficit does not only affect height, it reshapes cognition. It shortens attention. Hunger makes time feel slower and heavier. If this changes how you perceive time, what did work feel like from inside that body? The fields demanded you, not as metaphor, as labor unit. By age 5, you could scare birds. Stand in the furrows at dawn with a wooden clapper or a strip of cloth tied to a stick. Walk the rows, make noise. Keep the crows off the seed. Do this for hours while your fingers went numb. It was not optional. The Manor Court rolls record fines levied against families whose children failed to appear during planting season. Work was encoded into law, enforced by reeve and bailiff, expected as rent in labor when coin ran short. Gleaning came later, after harvest, when the Lord's portion had been carted away. You followed behind the adults and gathered what the sickle missed. Loose kernels, broken stalks, enough to mean the difference between thin porridge and none. This was legal, sanctioned. The poor had customary right to glean, and children did most of it. It looked like charity. It functioned as wage suppression. By 7, you might tend geese. By 9, help with the threshing. The progression was automatic. And here is where the question sharpens. When every action is obligated, supervised, and necessary for survival, what counts as consent? Because resistance did happen. The records show it. Sparingly, in ways that matter. But if work was the skeleton of your day, something else gave it shape. Something that reached you before you were old enough to labor and would hold you after the last harvest of your life. The church, not in the abstract, in stone, in sound. In the bell that told you when to rise, when to stop, when to kneel. Canonical hours divided time before you had words for time. The monastery rang them in sequence: matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. And even in the fields, you felt the rhythm. The day had a spine. The parish church was likely the only public building you ever entered. Not the manor, not a market hall. The church. You were carried there before you could walk. Delaying baptism was not permitted. Baptism happened within a day or two of birth, sometimes within hours. Not as custom, as emergency. An unbaptized child who died went to limbo, neither heaven nor hell, but a permanent elsewhere. A geography with no exit. Parents understood this not as theology, but as threat. The priest had to be reachable. The water had to be there. This is what you feared more than hunger. Hunger might kill your body. A death unshriven, without last rites, without confession. That could cost something that didn't end. The church gave the week its feast days, the year its calendar, and the self its only coordinates beyond the field. It was doctrine. It was also, for you, the only institution that knew your name. Did you ever actually play? And if so, what happened to that play as you got older? You did. The ground remembers it. Clay marbles, carved wooden animals, improvised balls made from stuffed leather or wrapped rags. Manuscript margins show children balanced on stilts, swinging sticks, wrestling in dirt courtyards. Play existed, but it had a horizon. By age 7 or 8, if you were a girl, that horizon arrived. You were folding cloth now, watching younger siblings, grinding grain, carrying water, spinning thread until your fingers cramped. The work wasn't preparation for adulthood. It was adulthood already begun. For boys, the margin lasted slightly longer, maybe to 10, maybe 12. Then came apprenticeship, or the field consumed you whole. You were binding yourself to a mason, a baker, a blacksmith, 7 years of obedience in exchange for a trade. Or you stayed home and became a plowman, a swineherd, a son who would inherit dirt. There was no word for adolescence. No protected years between child and adult. The boundary was permeable because it barely existed. You worked, or you were a burden. The toys stayed in the courtyard. You didn't. Step inside the house. Not metaphorically, physically. Duck your head because the doorframe is low and let your eyes adjust because they will need to. There is almost no light. What little enters comes through the door itself, or through gaps in the wattle that the daub hasn't fully sealed. In winter, even that closes off. You live for months in a room that is essentially dark. The smell hits before the sight does. Wood smoke, yes, but also damp earth, animal dung, wet straw, and the particular weight of bodies that have not been washed in weeks. The rushes on the floor are changed occasionally, but not often. Beneath them, the earth is packed hard by years of feet. And then there are the animals. A cow, maybe. Pigs. Chickens moving freely near the hearth. This is not neglect. This is engineering. Their warmth is real and measurable, and in a structure with no insulation and no chimney, you take warmth wherever it breathes. The fire burns in the center of the room. Smoke rises and has nowhere clean to go. It filters through the thatch slowly, reluctantly. You breathe it every night. Everyone does. The cough that settles into your chest each winter, you think of it as seasonal, ordinary, the way cold is ordinary. You don't yet have a word for what it's quietly doing to your lungs. Home is warm enough to survive, dark enough to disorient, and shared with every living thing that keeps the family breathing. You've spent 10 minutes inside your own life in 1300. You've seen the work, the cold, the hunger, the smoke in the lungs. But here's the part we haven't named yet. If you survived, you would be 48 years old in 1348. The year the plague reached England. Everything you learned, everything you endured, everything you were told would last forever. It would all be tested by something that had no name yet. Something you couldn't see coming. So the question, what is the value of a life lived before catastrophe? Did any of it matter? Did the work, the obedience, the cold mornings, the smoke-filled nights? Did these mean anything if the world they were building toward was about to collapse? Because every child in this story grew up inside a world that felt permanent, eternal, and it was 48 years from annihilation. There is a moment, somewhere around midday, when your body stops cooperating. Not dramatically, not all at once. The hands slow first, then the grip weakens. Then the mind starts to drift in a way that has nothing to do with distraction. It's the body pulling resources back toward its core, rationing what's left. That moment arrived predictably around the hour of sext. The bell, if there was one nearby, marked it. Work paused. 30 minutes, sometimes less. If the family had anything left for morning, you might eat. A piece of bread, a small bowl of pottage that had thickened and cooled. Sometimes nothing. Sometimes just water and stillness. Then you went back. And this is where the body's record becomes visible in the historical evidence. Not in documents, but in bones. Monastery infirmary records describe hernias in children who carried loads too heavy for their frame. Fractures that set wrong because there was no one to set them right. Eye infections so persistent they became chronic. From smoke mostly, the constant low burn of hearths without chimneys. These weren't accidents. They were the expected cost of being useful. The body adapted when it could. When it couldn't, it failed quietly, and the work continued around it. How many children carried permanent damage into adulthood? And what did that damage cost them when the worst years were still ahead? Was there any moment that belonged only to you? Any hour that was genuinely yours? The answer is yes. 1 hour, maybe less. You came home when the light failed. The whole household did. Work ended not by choice, but by darkness. There was no oil to spare for lamps, and tallow candles were for emergencies or the Lord's hall. So you returned to the cottage, to the fire, to whatever had been left simmering since morning. The evening meal was the day's second act of eating. Pottage again, thicker now if there was grain left over. Bread if the week had been good. Everyone ate from the same pot, dipping with wooden spoons or torn crusts. You sat on stools or the floor. The fire was the only light. And then, this is the part the records mention briefly, almost in passing, there was an hour before sleep. An hour when the work stopped. Not rest in the way we think of it, but something close. The adults repaired tools, mended fishing nets, sharpened blades. But they also talked, told stories, sometimes from Scripture, more often about neighbors, old quarrels, local hauntings. You sat and listened. Sometimes someone sang, not for performance, just because the room was quiet and the day was done. This was leisure. This was the margin. And then the pallets came out, straw-stuffed sacks, thin wool if you were lucky, and the household lay down together. Parents, children, the pig if it was winter, all in one room, no privacy, no separation. You slept in the cold and the dark and the smell of bodies, and you woke when the work called again. You followed one child through one day, and now you know what it cost. The cold before light, the hunger managed, not solved, the work that never separated itself from survival. The prayer that was also a form of fear, the sleep that was less rest than reset. This was 1300, not the worst year, not the best, just the ordinary weight of a life built entirely around staying alive inside a system designed to extract everything you had. And here is what you need to hold on to. The children living that day had no idea they were the last full generation to live entirely within those constraints. They didn't know the world they were building would be dismantled within 50 years. They couldn't know. In 1348, the plague arrived, and within 3 years, between 40 and 50% of Europe's population was gone. Lords looked out across their manors and found half the hands missing. Suddenly, labor was scarce. Suddenly, a peasant could walk away and be wanted somewhere else. Serfdom, that ancient architecture of compulsion, began to crack. The children who survived the plague inherited something their parents never had. Not safety, not comfort, but room. Room to negotiate, room to move, room, eventually, to refuse. The day we followed was ordinary. That is exactly the point. Because what the plague destroyed wasn't just bodies. It was the ordinary, the grinding, unquestioned ordinariness of a world where a child like the one you followed could expect nothing different, generation after generation, forever. That child's grandchildren would be born into a broken world. But broken things have openings. And for the first time in centuries, the children of the poor had somewhere to go. You've been watching a child who didn't know they were medieval. They knew cold. They knew hunger. They knew the weight of a tool in their hands and the sound of their father coughing in the dark. They knew obligation, exhaustion, a few hours of firelight, and the particular comfort of someone breathing next to them at night. That's all they knew. That was their entire world. We call it medieval England. We call it 1300. We attach dates, context, historical significance. We say this was the world before the plague, the moment before everything changed. But they didn't live in a moment before. They lived in now, complete, immediate, and theirs. Their now. Complete, real, and utterly indifferent to what would come next. Survival wasn't a theme in their childhood. It was the architecture. Every structure, every rhythm, every negotiation was built on the question, will we make it through? Not through the year, through winter, through harvest, through tonight. Subscribe now to follow this village into 1349, the same streets, 1 year before the world ends. The next video enters the same streets after the plague arrives.